Hello everyone, this is Jake and welcome back to another episode of building a web server in Python. This time around I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you what we're going to make before we make it. So let's go ahead and take a look. So in our episode 2 we created a little remote control application, if you will, where you could go type in any Python code and it would execute on the server. So that's kind of dangerous to do, so I went ahead and created a login page so that you actually have to log in with some credentials in order to see it. So you can't just type any old password. You have to have the actual proper username and password. So it welcomes me back by name, and then I can click on remote control here and I can type in Python, and this is the same exact code we used last time, so it still works. I've got a back button that appears when I'm on this sub page, and then when I click log out I can't go back into the remote control. I actually have to log in. So let me clear out the code that I just wrote and then we'll get started. Okay, so I've got my code loaded from the last episode. Let's go ahead and just jump right in here. So the first thing we're going to need is an additional view so we can display a different page. You generally want a different view for each route you take. So for instance, if you have, so here's the root of your server, you have a users section and you have a remote, like what we're gonna have, and you have charts, and you have whatever. Each of these is going to be a separate view which can handle any amount of routes below it. So for our purposes right now we're going to need a second view, and we'll just call this main. It's going to be basically the same thing as our other view. I'm just going to put pass here for now until we return to it. And let's go ahead and call this remote. It'll give us a better hint as to what this is. And we're going to change the route on our remote to be remote, which will help us out. And we're getting kind of long on the end of the line, so I'm going to go ahead and reformat that. And then we need an additional route to our main, and we'll just use that root. And we'll call this index, just to be confusing. And we also need to rename this. And I'll tell you this time around what these names get you in a second. We'll go ahead and handle the get and post because we're going to need them both. Okay, so we've got a new view called main. Let's go ahead and let's look at the directory structure. So for a review from last time, we've got a templates folder which contains all of our HTML, and then we have our Python file, which is our web server code. So if we go in here, we only have one file right now, but we know we'll need at least two. So let's go ahead and create another one called remote. And I also know I'm going to need to create a base file. This file will contain the common code between our two pages. So let's open those up. Okay, so all three of these files are identical right now, but a lot of this code is, I guess you could call it boilerplate, so we don't really need this in every single file. And what Flask gives you, well, what Jinja 2 gives you, is the ability to inherit other HTML files into each other when it renders. So I've already prepared some of this HTML, so you don't have to watch me write it all. So here's what our base is going to be. It's just a very basic structure, and I'm also including a style sheet here just so that we don't have to look at really ugly HTML output. The interesting things to note here is Jinja defines these blocks. So I've defined a block here called body, and I've defined a block here in my navigation. And what this will get me is the ability to, in my child templates the ability to add some HTML at these 2 points by name. So let's take a look at that a little closer. Let me go ahead and just copy over my other 2 files. So here's our remote. This is once again, this is the episode 2 HTML with the additional Jinja templating stuff inside of it. So at the very top we see it extends base, and then it defines block body, and then I've got a bunch of the stuff that we had last time in here, and then down at the bottom we have in block, and then another block nav. So in this body section, this will just append all of this in our base section right here inside of this div, and then our navigation will be appended in this list. So if we go back and look at this navigation, you see I added this back item, which is how you can click back to go back to the previous page. Something additional that you might have noticed already is instead of hard coding URLs, typically you want to, using the Jinja syntax, use this URL for, and this is something that I believe Flask gives you. But basically, you could be moving around your site, your URLs a lot, so you don't have to go into your HTML and constantly change them if you just want to rename one section of your site to something else. So this URL for is smart. It'll get you by name the URL for this item. So if we go back to our Python script, we can see we named it remote and index. So if we say URL for remote, it knows that this is the URL for remote. So that's what that gets you. So let me go ahead and copy over the last HTML file. So this will be our main splash page. So this also extends base and has the same blocks for body. I just have a little welcome message, and then right here we see we have a conditional if username is in session. So I mentioned last time a little something about sessions. So each user gets a session, a session cookie, and so your web server knows the difference between Bob and Jim and all these different users. If you log in with each of them, it knows the difference between them all. So if this basically is if the user is logged in, then it tells you welcome back to that username. So that's kind of nifty. This else statement takes care of if you're not logged in. It displays a form where you can log in. And then this is our typical message flashing stuff right here. And then we have an in block. You'll notice there's no block nav in this section. The blocks are optional. You don't have to implement them. Probably another thing to note is if I just go down here below this block and type stuff and save this, this won't appear in my HTML output. If you're extending some other item and it doesn't have a block defined and you type outside of it, it typically won't display it. There might be a special case, but I don't think it ever displays it. Alright, so we've got all our HTML items set up. Let's go back here. I noticed this earlier. This needs to be remote.html, not index anymore. And up here, this will be index eventually. But now let's go ahead and let's get our login page set up here. Okay, so our login page is going to be pretty simple. At least the get method will. We're going to go ahead and just render the index template. Let's pull up our browser and see what we got at this point. View function. Oh, I forgot to return this. That's why it's always good to look, see what's going on once in a while. Okay, cool. So I got this all set up. Oh, I also dropped in the CSS file, which you can download that. Check the video description for that. So it gives it a nice little look here and a nice navigation. So I can go to my remote control page now, and I got the back button. Cool. So stuff's working pretty well. I wasn't actually expecting it to get this far. So if we put anything in here and submit, it'll probably say method not allowed. Oh, the function didn't yes, because I have already allowed that method, so we just need to define the post method now. Okay, so we know that we're we're going to get a post method, and we need the username and we need the password. So we need to get that out of the request object. So flask.request.form is where the username and the password will go. So we're going to require the username and the password are going to need to be passed in. So let's make a little loop right here for our required. If R isn't in the form, we're gonna, well, first we're gonna flash a message. I'm gonna do a format string here, R. So this will tell the user return. Let's do a redirect. So you can also return a redirect, which is probably the preferred way of sending a user to a different path. Instead of, like I did in the previous example, I returned a self.get, which came back up here. This is probably the preferred method. I'm not sure exactly why, but speaking of which, we should do remote. Okay. So anyway, yeah, this will run through the username, and actually I've spelled it differently, didn't I? Password like this, and if one of those isn't there, it'll return an error. You shouldn't rely on your JavaScript or something to check to see if the user entered it, because people can get around your JavaScript. So okay, so we have a check to make sure that it was actually entered, but does it exist in our database? Speaking of which, we don't have a database. Let's just make a little dictionary up here with my username as a key and password is bacon. Why not? So okay, so now we have a database of usernames to passwords. So let's just take the username out of the request object for easy access, and we'll do the same thing for the password. Okay, so now if, oops, what did I do? Okay, so if the username is in users and users at that username equals the password that was brought in, that means the user successfully logged on, and so we can store in the session that guy's username or girl. Okay, so if they if something else happened, either case, we want to flash a message that says the username doesn't exist or incorrect password. You don't want to give them a hint as to which case occurred, because if you tell them, well, the username's wrong, then they can guess, oh, guess a different username this time. Okay, now it's telling me the username's okay, but the password's wrong. You don't want to give any hackers, you know, an inch, or they will take it. So we're going to redirect to, oops, Flask. Having trouble typing. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Oh, there's one other case. Well, let's go back and I'll show you that case. So if we go here, oh, something crashed. Invalid syntax. Wow, what did I do? If R not in. Okay, restart that. I have a double return. Come on guys, why aren't you telling me this? Oh, because you can't talk through the screen at me. Okay. Okay, so now if we attempt to log in here with those credentials, alright, we're logged in. And so we're logged in, we can see that. And the only thing that we didn't handle now is this logout. So let's go back and look at this. If we look at our index page, we have this section is for if you're logging in, you're not logged in. So it sends a username, and for my if you're already logged in, you get a button that's called logout. So we need to also check to see if this logout is there. Let's go back to our code. Oh, what am I doing? Okay, so up here at the top, before we do any of this, let's just see if logout is in the request form. Then we know the user needs to log out, so all you have to do is pop the username off the session, and then we will return a redirect to index. Okay, there we have it. Let's go test that. Alright, I'm logged out, but as you can see, there's one missing piece here. We can still get to the remote control even if we're not logged in. So let's fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is we're going to use decorator to protect the entire remote view. So if you've ever done decorators before, or I guess if you haven't done decorators, don't panic. They're pretty handy. They can get a little messy though. So let's define a function which takes a method, and we also need to import functools because it has a handy little thing we're going to use. So we're going to use a functools decorator and indicate that we are wrapping this method. I believe this cleans up the traceback for you. So we're going to define a wrapper which takes args and keyword args. This is pretty standard decorator stuff. So now we're going to check to see if username is in the session. If it is, it's okay to go ahead and just call that method. If it's not, that means that they're not logged in, and so we want to flash that so tell the user that they need to log in before they can go look at that page. And then we're going to redirect them to the index so that they can just go directly and log in. So then we need to return this wrapper. So a little explanation on what this decorator does. Oh, first let me go ahead and do this before I forget, because I will forget. Login required. Login required. So now this will make it so once Flask gets a get or post request for this remote path, first it'll hit this decorator. The decorator executes and wraps this. So essentially what happens is it replaces the get and the post with this wrapper, but the wrapper also knows what this method is. So if the user's logged in, it just invokes this code. If he's not, then it doesn't. It does something else. And this return is what gets executed when this first runs through and essentially replaces what this is. So now this protects our remote stuff, and so we can go test that out. Yes, so login is required, so then we can complete, go full circle, remote control, excellent. So it looks like everything is working. So there you go, now you have a login controlled remote control server thingy. So let me know how this is in the comments, and see you guys later.